Probably get started this evening. And again, if you've just logged in, you'll probably see that poll feature on your screen. Please go ahead and answer that when you have a moment. We're going to look forward to receiving your response. But for those of you that have already filled out, thank you again for that. Most importantly, thanks for joining us. My name is Michael King. I'm the Executive Director of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome you to this evening's program. We've got a really, I think, special program in store for you tonight. Before we begin, though, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Southwest Seattle Historical Society and our Log House Museum are located on the traditional lands of the Duwamish people, past and present. We are grateful to the Duwamish people, Seattle's first people, for stewarding this land throughout the generations. It is really hard to believe that we are in the final month of the calendar year, that this is the last presentation of our speaker series this year. I feel like it was just January, but nevertheless, we're here and we're so grateful that you've joined us during this holiday season. We, as I mentioned, we have a very special program in store for you tonight. We're joined by Julie Pham, who will be introduced to you momentarily. I want to let you know, though, that tonight's program is part of the Humanities Washington Speakers Bureau. And Humanities Washington, of course, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to opening minds and bridging divides by creating spaces to explore different perspectives. We are grateful to Humanities Washington here at the Historical Society for making this opportunity possible. And I'd encourage you to explore more about Humanities Washington at their website, which is humanities.org. So I'd encourage you to take a look. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Seattle Public Library and our sponsors, Luna Park Cafe, Alki Beach Academy, Home Street Bank, For Culture, and Duwamish Tribal Services, whose generosity makes these free experiences possible for our entire community. And of course, again, thank you so much to all of you for joining us. We can't do this without you. So with all that said, I'm going to turn things over to Dora Faye Hendricks. Dora Faye is the chair of our speaker series, and she is a trustee of the Historical Society. Dora Faye, it's all yours.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome again, everyone. Tonight, you know that the presentation will be about hidden histories, the South Vietnamese side of the Vietnam War. Have you ever wondered how the South Vietnamese military really experienced the Vietnam War? Our presenter tonight is historian Julie Pham, as you've heard, from Humanities Washington. She draws from interviews she conducted with 40 South Vietnamese military veterans in the United States and illuminates how people can remember historical events differently. Julie is the CEO of CuriosityBased, a consulting practice focused on fostering curiosity in the workplace. Her family owns Northwest Vietnamese News. She published, quote, "The War, Their War, the Perspectives of the South Vietnamese Military in the Words of Veteran-Emigres." In 2019. She earned her PhD in history from the University of Cambridge as a Gates Cambridge Scholar, and she lives in Seattle. As many of you might have read in the promotional material, the Vietnam War was seen by much of the Western world as being fought between the Americans and North Vietnamese Communists, with the South Vietnamese largely absent. Yet many Vietnamese refugees who came to America after the war served in the South Vietnamese military, and there's little recognition and understanding of their contributions and role in the war. In fact, in American and Vietnamese communist histories, the South Vietnamese are painted as corrupt, apathetic sidekicks to the Americans. But let's, Julie, tell these hidden stories, the South Vietnamese side of the Vietnam War. Welcome to Words, Writers, and Southwest Stories, Julie.
Thank you so much, Dora Faye. I am so excited to be here, so honored to get invited. This is my very second Humanities Washington talk, and so I'm really grateful for this opportunity. So I just want to share a bit first of how this talk is going to go. So we're going to have 4 parts. So you will hear me share the context, give some historical background about the Vietnam War, and then I am going to share a series of quotes from South Vietnamese military veterans. And I'm going to ask for some volunteers, by the way, for some people who really are who like to read out loud, and you will get to read these quotes, and so that we can hear some different voices. And then we're going to do Q&A. And by the way, if you have some questions that pop up, you can put that into that Q&A window. If I look over and I see that the question would really be clarifying, I'll answer it right then and there. If not, then I'm just going to hold it until that Q&A section. And then the 4th part is a discussion part. And what that means is we're going to have the opportunity to have some breakout rooms, and we'll actually go into another Zoom room for that. For those who actually want to have some time to chat with one another about the things that you learned. So that's the breakout. We'll do context setting. You'll get to hear quotes. We'll do Q&A, and then we're going to move to another Zoom link and do some breakout sessions. I just want to also, thinking about Kabul, I just can't help but think about the fall of Saigon in 1975. I'm just thinking about the current events that we're in right now, and how it was Governor Dan Evans who made Washington the very first state to welcome Vietnamese refugees, when Governor Jerry Brown of California refused to accept Vietnamese refugees. And so I just bring this up because I'm so grateful to Washington's long history of welcoming refugees. So I'm Julie Pham. This is a photo of me and my father, Kim Pham, and we are at a refugee camp in Indonesia. And in this photo, I am 2 months old. And we had just fled Vietnam by boat because my father had spent 3 years in a communist re-education camp for having served as an officer in the Republic of Vietnam Military during the Vietnam War. And the next picture is this is me with my father 40 years later, at the launch of my book, Their War, about the Republic of Vietnam military perspective of the Vietnam War. So during those 40 years in between, my parents founded the first privately run Vietnamese language newspaper in the Northwest. And I also conducted 40 interviews with Republic of Vietnam veterans for my college thesis that became the basis of this book. And I earned my PhD in modern Southeast Asian history from Cambridge University. So growing up in a Vietnamese refugee family in the US has given me a different way of seeing the Vietnam War, one that is not represented in mainstream American media. And that's the perspective that I want to share with you today. These stories of my father and his compatriots who are living in the US today. I also want to make it really clear, this is their perspective. I actually, as a historian, I actually don't think that there is only one single truth. I think that there are multiple truths that coexist. And so tonight, I just want to share with you this, this perspective of the Vietnam War. And I think that you'll also see that it's quite nuanced, and also there are lots of variations within it. So when you came in, I asked for people to fill out this poll, and it helps me understand who is in the audience tonight. And I'm going to share the results of that. So it was, which choice best describes you? And I'm sharing the results right now. And you can see that the biggest group of people here are, I know a veteran of the Vietnam War, though I did not serve. We have a few veterans, 3 veterans of the Vietnam War. Thank you for your service. And also there are people who know both Republic of Vietnam and US veterans of the war that did not serve. and a few people who didn't know anyone who served in the military during the war. And then I also see that there are 4 other categories. And if you want, you can put in, if you're an other, you can put into the chat window what that means. I see there's one category of, are you a military brat who had a parent who served in the Vietnam War? Well, actually, that means that you do know that you do know a veteran of the Vietnam War, but you didn't serve. So thank you, Deb. Thank you, Deb Barker. Yes, and for those who do want to share what that other category is, feel free to put that into the chat window. So, so what is missing is there's no one here who served in the Republic of Vietnam military, and there are a few people who do know some people who served in the Republic of Vietnam military. So, and that's the perspective you'll get to hear tonight. I would also like to get a sense of what people think about when they hear the Vietnam War. What words come to mind for you? And if you could just put it, you can put in the chat window just any words that come to mind for you when you hear Vietnam War. And I'll just read them out loud as they come in. The draft. Thanks, John. Death and violence, Viet Cong. Trauma and tragedy. Sadness and loss, fiasco. Yes, suffering. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this. So lots of different emotions, and just generally a really sad, hard time. So, and you're going to see some of that in the quotes that we go through. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll. So now, before we go in too deep, I want to give you a quick primer on the Vietnam War. So first, there was the first Indochina War that was between the French and the Vietnamese Communists, and that ended with the Vietnamese Communists ending French colonial rule and Vietnam being divided at the 17th parallel, which is what you see on this map right here, this line right here. And then they had open borders for 300 days. And so during that time, people could move back and forth. They could go up north, they can go down south. And so 1 million people fled from the north to the south. And that includes my parents' family and many of the people who I interviewed. And so actually my parents were refugees twice, refugees from the north to the south and then to the US. And so 1 million went south, 50,000 went north. Then came the Second Indochina War, or known as the Vietnam War. And so this started in 1955 and it lasted until 1975. And this was a war between communism and capitalism. The Vietnamese communists, represented by red on the map, and then there were the Republic of Vietnam, represented by the blue. And what you see, the red is also, you see, well, actually the yellow stars, that represents Viet Cong fighters in the South. And so this was happening during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union aided the Vietnamese communists, and America supported the Republic of Vietnam. And the war in Vietnam was seen as an extension of this Cold War. And Americans were afraid that if Vietnam was lost to communism, then other Southeast Asian countries would topple as well. So you can see those yellow dots that represent the battles, and you can see that the war took place mostly in the Republic of Vietnam. So the Americans supported the war effort until about 1969, and that's when American protests against the war made it very unpopular, and they started to withdraw in 1973. The war ended in 1975 with the communists taking over the Republic of Vietnam. And then many Vietnamese refugees started coming to the US in waves. And now there are over 2 million living in the US. So many of them came by boat, and that's how my family came. So it is easiest to think about this as being a war between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. And I'm going to use the language that was actually used by the veterans that I interviewed, which is there were the Vietnamese communists to refer to North Vietnam, and the communists to refer to North Vietnam as well as the communists in the South. And then there's the Republic of Vietnam to refer to South Vietnam. Now, the Republic of Vietnam, when I say the Republic of Vietnam, that really emphasizes a society in which people define freedom as being able to have privately owned enterprises as opposed to being state-owned. In communist Vietnam now, the Republic of Vietnam is referred to as South Vietnam, or the puppet government. It is not, in Vietnam now, they do not call they do not call it the Republic of Vietnam. And when I started doing this research, I was interviewing in English. This is when I was in college, or in a mix of English and Vietnamese. And since then, I've become fluent in Vietnamese. And now I can actually discern the difference between the word South Vietnam, which is what veterans say in English, versus Vietnam Cộng Hòa, which translates to the Republic of Vietnam when they speak in Vietnamese. And this is important because when veterans are speaking in Vietnamese, the name Republic of Vietnam emphasizes their desire for freedom under a republic. And I'm going to be saying RVN for short. So the RVN veterans, they refer to the war as the war to protect against the invasion of North Vietnam and communism. And the Vietnamese communists, they refer to it as the war to fight the Americans and save the country. So this is, there are two really different ways of seeing the war. And the Vietnamese communists saw the RVN as a state that needed to be saved. And the people who I interviewed, the RVN veterans, they felt that the communists were invading their country. And then we know the Americans refer to this as the Vietnam War. So I bring this up because even the way that we name events and places differently reflect the different perspectives on history, even how we remember history. Even the way that in Vietnam, the fall of Saigon is referred to as National Liberation Day. And for many Vietnamese Americans here, they call this the day we lost our country. So again, same day, different ways of seeing that, remembering that. So now what I want to do is show you some popular examples of stereotypes of the Vietnam War in popular media that reflect the perspective of the Vietnam War during this time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this clip from the 1979 movie Apocalypse Now. And this is an iconic film about the Vietnam War. And I am going to show you this battle scene where there is a colonel, an American colonel who talks to an American GI and a RVN soldier about a wounded Vietnamese communist soldier. So when I show this to you, I want you to pay close attention. I want you to pay close attention to the way that the Americans are portrayed, the RVN are portrayed, and the communists are portrayed. So think about those different representations. So and by the way, there is a lot of, this is very, the scene is really violent. And so if you think that violence is going to be really disturbing, then I suggest you don't look at it and you just turn on, you just watch, or you don't watch it, you maybe just listen to it. So I'm gonna play this scene for you now.
Controlled by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese. Hey, what's this? is this?
This man's hurt pretty bad, sir. About the only thing that's holding his guts in, sir, is that pot lid.
Yeah? What do you have to say?
This soldier is dirty busy. He wants water. He can drink patty water.
Get out of here! Give me that canteen.
Busy. It's just a
Any man brave enough to get out of here! Kick your fucking ass!
He's killing a lot of our people, you know?
Any man brave enough to fight with his guts strapped on can drink from my canteen any day!
Hey, Colonel, I think one of those sailors, Lance Johnson, the surfer.
Wait here, you sure? Down there.
All right. So, shut that down there. So that was a pretty violent scene right there. When you watch this scene, what do you think about who the Americans are, who the communists are, and who the RVN are? And I'd like for you to put this into the chat window, and you can just write Americans : how you think that they were portrayed. And I'll just read out some of these. American portrayed as bullies. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carla. Other thoughts about how the Americans were portrayed, or the communists or the South Vietnamese in this? Vietnamese desperate, Americans elitist and idol worshippers. Americans compassionate and caring for the wounded. So superficial, convern. I don't actually know the word convern. Oh, concern, superficial concern. Thank you, Marty. Vietnamese deferential. All right, thank you. Portrayed Vietnamese people as weak compared to the Americans. Officer versus enlisted, Americans selectively concerned. Thank you for those comments. And so something I actually want to point out here is in the comments, people say the Vietnamese, the Americans and the Vietnamese. And actually there are two Vietnamese here. There are the Vietnamese communists and those who are part of the Republic of Vietnam. And that actually really speaks to a very common way that the Vietnam War is portrayed, because typically it is, hey, they're the Vietnamese and they're the Americans. And the Vietnamese are de facto the North Vietnamese, the communists. And actually there are two, they're different. And so part of actually the way that Americans remember the war is just seeing the Vietnamese as this big lump. So yeah, in this scene reflects these three popular assumptions. That one, the Vietnam War was fought between the Americans and the Vietnamese represented by the communists, with the RVN soldier just pushed to the side. Two, that the Americans were in charge and what the RVN thought didn't matter. And that the RVN soldiers, they were just completely ignored. And three, that the Americans perceive the Vietnamese communists as braver fighters who are willing to die. So this representation isn't just in fictional accounts. In schools and in textbooks about the Vietnam War, also paint the RVN this way. And so Americans tend to think in terms of winners and losers. And there is a lot of focus on how Americans lost this war. And ironically, the real losers are the RVN military, because they only get to be defined in who they are in relationship to the Americans and to the Vietnamese communists. And this is actually a very American-centric way of remembering the Vietnam War. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the RVN military perspective of the Vietnam War. So this isn't just about looking at an understudied perspective of the Vietnam War. It's also about reflecting how what happens when we look at a war through the lens of winners and losers, what we end up losing out on. I am actually really interested in this question. How do people remember what happened in Vietnam? I'm not this question of who do we blame for this loss? So I'm going to share with you some basic background on the RVN military. And I'm going to share with you then my research methodology. And then you're going to get to hear from RVN military, the RVN military veterans themselves as they reflect on Americans, the communists, and themselves. So first, 30% of Vietnamese men, that's basically one man in every household, participated. There were 900,000 men who served in the South Vietnamese, the Republic of Vietnam military. And the Americans supported the war from 1955 until the 1968 Tet Offensive, when Americans started to pull out. And when the war ended with the fall of Saigon in 1975, the RVN officers were sent to re-education camps, which meant they were, and these camps were meant to indoctrinate RVN officers and leaders in communist ideology. So I told you earlier that my father served for 3 years in this re-education camp. Those who worked with him at the newspaper, he met in re-education camp, and they had served 8 years. Survivors have described these re-education camps as concentration camps, and estimates of people who were sent to the camps range from 50,000 to over 350,000. So this is, so I interviewed 40 military veterans in English in Seattle, in Sacramento, and in Orange County from 1999 until 2000. And they ranged from, actually, this is the slide I want to show you. They ranged from cadet officer to colonel. Most were captains and majors. They served from 3 years to 20 years. Most went to re-education camp, and they spent an average of 8.5 years there. The average age at the time of when I interviewed them was 58. Many of them came from middle-class backgrounds, and most were drafted. So as the daughter of a former naval officer and also the editor of a Vietnamese newspaper in Seattle, I had a relatively easy time of being able to access the people who I interviewed. And because of my personal background, most of my subjects seemed to trust me. And one person, Cam Nguyen, said, "I've been asked to give interviews about the war before, but I didn't want to. You're Vietnamese though, and I want to help." So the RVN officers, they were at this level. I'm going to show you this slide here. They were at this level that worked most closely with their American counterparts, called advisors. And these were American officers who worked with the Vietnamese officers, many of whom had at least studied English, to collaborate with each other on the battlefield. Now, it's important to note that these interviews, they took place in the US. And most sources actually don't interview RVN military living outside of Vietnam. Even in the renowned documentarian Ken Burns' 18-hour documentary about the Vietnam War, the RVN veterans that he interviewed were still living in Vietnam. Why is that significant? Why would it matter if you interview RVN veterans in Vietnam versus in the US? Well, because in Vietnam, life is still quite heavily censored. So for example, my family's newspaper, as of just 3 years ago, was blocked in Vietnam because it was considered anti-communist. I actually could not access it. And the biggest overseas Vietnamese newspaper in the world, which is in Southern California, it's still blocked. So you've heard about how the RVN are represented, and I want to share with you how they thought about the Americans, about the Vietnamese communists, and about themselves in their own words. By the way, this is a picture of me when I was in college in 1999, and I am interviewing Admiral Jun Van Jun. So I am going to ask for 3 volunteers because what I'm going to do is I'm going to flash a lot of quotes, and I want different people to read those quotes. And in each section, I'll have 3 quotes. So I'll ask for the first volunteer to read the first one, the second to read the second quote, and the third, and I'll call on your name. And what I'll do is I'll flash it. I want you, whoever the volunteer is, to read through it just briefly, silently, and then to read it out loud to everyone slowly, with feeling. And then I'll probably leave it up on the screen for a few, maybe 10 more seconds for everyone to read it again, just to digest before I move to the next quote. So what I'm going to do now is I'm asking for 3 people to volunteer. And the way that you volunteer is if you could, in the chat window and message it to everyone, say, I volunteer. I volunteer to be one of the readers. So I'm going to look for 3 hands, or 3 chat messages. Thank you. Was it Deb, the Morgan Community Association? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you, Deb, for volunteering. Now I need 2 more volunteers. Thank you, Nancy. James, thank you. Now we have our 3 volunteers. So we have Deb, Nancy, and James. Michael, could you make sure that they are unmuted, please? And so we'll always go in that order. It'll be Deb, Nancy, and James. And I'll call on you just before, just to remind you. So, and you just have to read with passion what's on the screen. I want to point out that most of these interviews, they were in English. And so the veterans refer to South Vietnam. And like I said before, now I recognize that if I were to do the interviews in Vietnamese, they would say Vietnam Cộng Hòa, which translates to the Republic of Vietnam. So the American side, when I first began this project, I expected to hear veterans complain about how patronizing the Americans were, because that is all I read in history books. And actually what I found was that most of the RVN veterans I talked to, they saw themselves as peers, and they emphasized the friendliness and the mutual respect in their relationships. So these interviews actually challenged the very premise on which these popular narratives have been based. So here's the first quote, and Deb, if you just read this one, give yourself a moment to, when you're ready, read it out loud to everyone. And this is hearing this from Dung Ba.
Go ahead and start.
Yes.
We respected each other and had a good relationship. In each operation, we discussed procedures very carefully and shared ideas. I gave my opinion, they gave me their opinions, and we both decided together. That was good, but the decision was mine, not my advisors. Dong Ba.
All right, Nancy. So I want to say that this was not to say that the veterans never encountered patronizing advisors. So let's hear from Tang Nguyen. Nancy.
When I wanted anything for my division, there was no way for me to get it without the advisors. They just had this power and forced us to do what they wanted to do. They never listened to us. Even if they listened, it was, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And after that, they did it their way. When I complained to my superior officers, they told me, you blame the American. They are here to help us. Tan Nguyen.
So many of the veterans also sympathized with and appreciated the Americans. And in general, the Republic of Vietnam veterans believed, number one, that Americans were more knowledgeable about logistics and technology. Number two, the Vietnamese had more field experience because they weren't just there to do a tour or two. And three, the Americans and the RVN veterans, they worked together. So almost every single veteran I interviewed said that they felt that the Americans had betrayed and abandoned the RVN by pulling out all the financial aid. Though the RVN also took responsibility for their loss. So let's hear from Duc Minh Chun. James?
We weren't self-reliant enough. Don't rely too much on your own allies, even though they are good ones. We are to blame for the loss of South Vietnam. Duc Minh Tran.
You can see that they weren't interested in absolving themselves of blame. They just wanted to share how they felt about it. So now we go to, how did the RVN feel about the North Vietnamese, about the communists? So the stereotypes described thus far define the RVN military explicitly in contrast to their allies and implicitly against their enemies, the Vietnamese communists. And even many textbook writers had similar views to those shown in Apocalypse Now. So for example, Marilyn Young sympathizes with the RVN because of how the Americans treated them, but she saw the Vietnamese communists as the authentic Vietnamese and the RVN as the foreign native. The RVN veterans didn't see themselves as any less Vietnamese, but many didn't fully understand the ideological differences. Many said that their parents never discussed politics as they were growing up, and that their understanding of the war was limited to the South is fighting for freedom. Freedom meant being able to own your own property versus the state owning it. So let's hear from Julie Pham. Deb.
I grew up in an anti-communist household. I told my father, don't worry about the communists. The communists will now be different from those before. My father became angry and said, you study political science and you are stupid like a dog. Communists will never change. My whole family was anti-communist. I alone had doubts. Only after Reeducation camp did I realize my father was right. I was stupid. The communists will never change. Nong Phuoc Tran.
About half the men interviewed admitted that they didn't really comprehend the reality of communism until they served in a communist re-education camp. When veterans compare themselves to the communists, the RVN veterans reiterate that they were conscious of their individual freedom and the sacrifices of that freedom for a collective freedom. In contrast, the Vietnamese communists lacked that consciousness. Let's hear from Peter Chung. Nancy.
I felt sorry for them because they were victimized by their own government. South Vietnamese soldiers were at least 18, but the North Vietnamese were sometimes only 14 or 15. They were forced to go and kill. They had no choice. Peter June.
So they acknowledged the discipline of the Vietnamese communists, which Americans admired. Nguyen Nguyen described an incident in which his company communicated with the communists during a ceasefire in 1973. Let's hear from him. James.
We were in a valley separated by a small river, and we took turns talking through a horn. This communist soldier was telling us how everyone in the South was poor and the police and the army were bad, but he didn't know that the South was free. He didn't know. Where I live in the South, it was very poor, very hungry, but there was freedom. We told him this. Qui Nguyen.
So the RVN veterans felt empathy for their enemies as fellow humans. Now, let's hear how the RVN veterans thought about themselves. In response to the negative stereotypes of corruption, apathy, incompetence, almost no one said that the stereotypes were unfounded, because they all said in any group, there will be people who do good and there'll be people who do bad things, especially to survive. The stories that they shared gave more insight into how they saw themselves. They also talked about how they felt about joining. Let's hear from Kim Pham. Deb.
We knew it was our responsibility to fight for freedom and democracy in the Republic of Vietnam. The other side was a dictatorship. They were coming from the north to the south and killing people. But we also knew that fighting for this freedom would likely mean sacrifice and death. Every day I'd see the flags and coffins in the streets, people dying and crying and bombing. Just because we knew it was the right thing to do didn't make the prospect of death to an 18 or 19-year-old any less scary. Kim Pham.
He had the dreams and hopes typical of any young free man of military draft age anywhere. For most of the men, the military was their first and only employer in Vietnam because the war lasted so long and began so early. They do not see the Americans as forcing this war on them. The war was a reaction to the communist invasion of the Republic of Vietnam. Let's hear what Nguyen Nguyen had to say. Nancy?
The communists didn't have the right to invade South Vietnam. I know when people live under the control of the communists, they have no freedom, no democracy. So I joined the army to fight for freedom, for democracy, for South Vietnam. Nguyen Nguyen.
They just didn't see an end to the war. So they were focused. So many acknowledged apathy, and the apathy wasn't just because of a lack of desire to fight or of patriotism. It actually came from exhaustion. So let's hear from the Nguyen. James?
Well, the South Vietnamese thought, okay, you come over here, you take care of the hard job. You will be here for a year, no more, no less. When you go, we stay behind. We have to live with this war for the rest of our life. We are not in a hurry. For most Vietnamese, we know that there is no end to this game, so why get killed? Take it easy. The Americans are more than welcome to get into the battlefield, do the hard work. That's the Vietnamese thinking when the Americans were in Vietnam. Vin Loc.
They just didn't see an end to the war, so they focused on survival. So how do they want to be remembered? This is how the RVN remembered themselves and others in the war. They also talked about how they want to be remembered by others. I want to reenact a dialogue that I had with Byung Ba. So I am going to ask Deb to read his role.
They have done this before. They do it now, and they will continue to do it in the future too. They do it. I don't know why, but they still do it.
Do what?
Betray us. They stab us with a knife. They try to overturn history. They try to change black to white and white to black. I want Americans and Vietnamese Americans to know the truth and always the truth.
What is the truth?
We had the right to fight during the war because the North infiltrated to the South, and we had responsibility to fight back against them. That is the truth. And I want future generations to know about it.
For him and for many veterans, making black black again and white white again is not just a matter of negating the tropes that define them. Instead, they just wanted to share their side of the story, to explain what happened in Vietnam, and to show that they fought in the war for freedom, democracy, love, and duty towards their homeland, along with, not for the Americans. In their version of remembering history, the role of ally to the Americans replaces that of being inferior to the Americans. The question of who is to blame is not that important. They cease to be defined in relation to the Americans and the Vietnamese communists. They have their own voice. So I want to end with this quote from Home Pham. Nancy, when you're ready.
In my dream, I can speak English well and very persuasively. I tell Americans a story, tell them about my perception, my view about the war, and tell them why communism is not good for the country. And communism is why the South Vietnamese people had to flee Vietnam in 1975. And that is why we are here now. Home Pham.
I am part of a generation of Vietnamese Americans whose fathers served and fought for our freedom. And now we're working to reclaim our voice in our adopted homeland. So now, first of all, can we give a virtual round of applause to Deb, Nancy, and James? Thank you so much for volunteering to read. Thank you for reading with so much conviction and passion there too. So now we have Q&A, and I see Dorothy.
I'm here.
Your hand is up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to clap. I was trying to help with the applause. The one question, how do you think things would have turned out differently if Ngo Dinh had not been assassinated?
Oh gosh, thanks James for that question. It's always hard to say what if. It's always hard for me to answer those questions. I mean, perhaps there could be, so Ngo Dinh Diem was he was the president of South Vietnam, and he was considered this kind of puppet president to the Americans put into place. Although that there are many Vietnamese nationalists who support him now, remember him with support in terms of just being in opposition to communism. So, I mean, if he had not been assassinated, then the war could have gone on even longer. I don't know. I don't do what if questions very well. How did people end up in re-education camp? Were they indoctrinated with communism? Okay, thank you, Carla. So a lot of people actually don't know a lot of people in the US and outside of Vietnam don't know about re-education camp. And so those who were officers in the Republic of Vietnam military and those who served in the Republic of Vietnam government after the war, they were sent to these camps so that they could learn more about communism. And I'm going to share a story of how different awareness of these re-education camps are. There's a movie I think it was made in 2006 called Journey from the Fall, and it was about the boat people and re-education camp experience. And it was based on about 500 interviews with people who went through it. And so in the movie, there are all these scenes of people being in re-education camp. And when I was living in Hanoi, I showed this film, and this was in 2008. I showed this film to a room full of Vietnamese nationals. And when I turned the light on, their faces were shocked. Their mouths were hanging open. And it was just like, that's not what I know about re-education camp. Because in Vietnam now it's considered, well, it's these polite places where people just learned about communism. And so you have many people who have different stories of what that experience was like. Yes, and then House of Sticks is also really, it's a great memoir the author's father was in re-education camp.
Julie, some anonymous is asking, what is South Vietnam like today?
Well, so there is no more South Vietnam. There's Southern Vietnam because it's now a united, one united country. And Saigon is called Ho Chi Minh City. And I think it's a really, I mean, I've lived on and off in Vietnam for 5 years since 2001, and the country as a whole is super vibrant. The economy is doing really well, and in the South, it's actually doing there's lots of luxury stores. You can go to Louis Vuitton and like buy $5 cups of coffee there, and so it's a really vibrant place to be.
Thank you, Julie. Did you respond to that question about the Francis Fitzgerald book?
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
Yeah. What do you think of it? It was the only book that this person, that Mary, was told was valid.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm now seeing the. I think that it was her perspective. So it's been a while since I've read it. It's probably actually been like 20 years, but I definitely think that it was also very biased. So I don't think that like I said at the beginning, there's no single truth in history. There are all of these just different perspectives. So I think that was a book that really was very sympathetic with Vietnamese communists.
What's the name of that book, Julie?
Fire in the Lake, I believe.
Oh, yes. Someone else answered that just as we were asking.
Yeah.
Did you see the question from Nancy?
So when I was younger and I asked my maternal grandfather about the Vietnam War, he never referred to Reeducation camp. He always said it was the Vietnamese word for prison. Yes. Yeah. And it was considered, that's the word that they would use, prison. Because it was, I mean, a very harsh place where people didn't know when they were going to leave. Thank you for pointing out that difference, Nancy.
Ramon,
I have not read You Don't Belong Here. What about the environmental damage in Vietnam from bombs and chemicals? Yes, there's been a lot of damage. And I know that there's a really great nonprofit in Seattle and Washington called Ptsd that does a lot to do to take out buried landmines.
Julie, Deb is asking if you have read You Don't Belong Here.
No, I haven't read that one.
And Ramon was asking, why did South Vietnam lose the war? Like maybe your opinion, I'm not sure.
I mean, one could be that Americans pull, I mean, the way that for a lot of RVN veterans is the Americans pulled their support too early. So I actually don't fixate on why do people win or lose. I'm just more interested in how people remember the war. So
there was a question from Judy, and I don't see it.
I think it's to what did the RVN attribute to the North Vietnamese victory. I would say that there's, in some of the quotes, you could see that there's a sense that the North Vietnamese were really relentless. It was just like there's this complete, didn't matter if you were 14 or 15 and sent people out to die. It was just like that's what had to get done. And for the South Vietnamese, it was seen as like we believe in a way to fight this war that doesn't mean sacrificing young people in that way.
Rosemary is asking, did these veterans receive treatment for PTSD as many US vets have? Oh,
that's a great question. I think that mental health is something that is still stigmatized in the Vietnamese community. So even if it was offered, it would not be something that people would want to admit to. So I know that Asian Counseling and Referral Service in Seattle does a lot of great work to provide counseling and for trauma. And yes, people go and seek help, and probably not nearly enough. Yes, Sorrow of War is also a really beautiful book.
And Nancy asked, if you were to continue research about the Vietnam War, would you focus on how it affected the generations who were born after the war in Vietnam, or the Vietnamese diaspora?
You know, first of all, this work was done 20 years ago. So I don't plan on continuing my research. I will say that the Vietnamese diaspora has done so many amazing things. And so I think that there can be a lot of just celebration of how the Vietnamese community in the US resettled and created, I mean, even if you think about the nail industry, manicures and pedicures, that's essentially created by Vietnamese refugees. And so I think that there's a lot to celebrate that people aren't aware of. So I actually think that I'd like to focus on celebration too.
I think that you have answered the questions that I have picked up.
All right.
Excuse me, one more comment. French history having Vietnam as a colony still in the effects? Tell me more about France and Vietnam.
Well, you can see the influence on food. You can see the influence even on the even some language. There are, one of my favorite Vietnamese words is galang, which means gallant. So it's like, if you think about, and it refers to a man being gentlemanly. So you say like, he's so galang, and it's like there are certain words that are used. Though after 1975, after the North Vietnamese won, there was actually a huge movement to purify the culture and to remove a lot of foreign influences. And so when that happened, there's even a lot of effort to remove Sino-Vietnamese words, because the Vietnamese that's spoken in the US there's still lots of Chinese influence, because it's almost considered like the way that you would drop in French or German words into English. And then after 75, there was a major effort to make it more purely Vietnamese. So, the question about French history, yes, there's influence, and the influence I would say is less today than it was pre-75.
Two comments. Max says, thank you for your informative talk. He has to leave since his internet connection is too unstable and intermittent. He missed too much of the talk. If you're still on, Mac, this has been recorded and will be available through the Log House Museum. So check back with us, or give them a week or so before it'll be up. And I think it's Deb said the Vietnamese Cultural Center in West Seattle is a wonderful, caring community. She experienced their kindness at a Memorial Day ceremony.
Great. Well, these are all really great questions and great comments. So now what I want to do is to give some space for people to have a conversation about what you reflected on. And so we need to go into a different Zoom link to do that, because this is a Zoom webinar and it's not equipped to do breakout rooms. And so what I just did was I put into the chat window this Zoom link. So if you want to join us to further this conversation, we'll put you into trios. And so you can have more conversations with each other about this, probably about 10, 15 minutes, then please join us on the other side. And if you're good with this part where you just wanted to more receive information and you're fine with not having a discussion, then thank you so much for participating to this point. So I put it into the chat window. Please copy that link, and we'll see you on the other side. But before, Michael or Dorothea, did you want to say anything to me? Say anything?
There were two questions left, one from Ramon and one from Nazar. Did you see that, Julie?
Okay,
From Ramon.
let's see. Yeah, I see a comment from Ramon, who's a Vietnam veteran. Thank you for your service. Returned to the States with a lot of anger and became a high school counselor, and worked with a lot of boat people, and can tell you that Vietnamese are some of the most beautiful people I've ever met. And Nazar, do older Vietnamese people in the US still think in terms of loyalty to North Vietnam or to South Vietnam? I'd say very much to South Vietnam. So.
Very good. I'll see you in
All
the
right.
chat room.
Well, so please go to that chat, and I'm going to put it in again. This is the link, and we'll see you on the other side. I'm going to leave so that I can open up that Zoom link. All right.
Julie, I'll wait in this room for a few minutes to give everyone an opportunity to log in.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Julie. This has been very informative. I'm going to sit and talk to you later, but we'll
Okay.
go into the chat room.
We'll see you in a bit.